So Eric, so I was wondering, as far as producing this show, what did you find challenging about producing this show and how bringing it to life?
Well, there's two sides to the production because one is obviously the art direction and preparation for animation, but the other side is managing the production. So we usual or typical in the day, but these days rare that you get 65 episodes ordered up front. So when Bruce and I went into this, it was both our first time running a show. So the little minute and a half film that we had done was sort of proof of concept. But then when you step into production and you have real dates and you've got a real budget and you've got a staff to hire, then you learn what it's about to truly produce a show. So the art and production side, although it's challenging and you're always trying to outdo yourself and a lot of creative choices to be made, that's the fun part. The difficult part is managing 70 people and their personalities and getting them paid and all of the issues that go on when you've got people working 15-hour days in a room, and it's a challenge trying to manage that family that it eventually becomes and still put out a product on time and be responsible for all the elements of that production.
So what did you enjoy most about working on this show?
Anytime I got to do actual artwork, I wasn't, because Bruce and I were both, you're bouncing between, at any one time there's probably 5 shows in production at different stages. So you're approving storyboard, but you're also looking at designs for the next episode, and you're conceiving designs for yet a script that's coming down the pike, and commenting on scripts that are still in production, trying to prep all that stuff. So when you find time to actually go back to your room and even to be able to give notes on design, to actually sit and draw or paint or give direction was probably the most satisfying. But as the production went along, it just became more and more rare, and to have that time to actually sit down and create artwork. So actually developing the artwork for each episode was probably the most satisfying, and it just became few and far between the deeper you got into the production, because you had to be responsible for everyone else. So.
Where are the title cards now?
I was going to ask that.
Oh gosh, I know that for a long time after I left Warner's, they had, the studio was fairly new when Bruce and I started Batman, because they started off with Tiny Toons. So I was there for 2 years. He was there for the same 2 years, and Tiny Toons was the only production. By the time we started Batman, it swelled into 3 productions, and then went out to maybe 5 after that. But during that second phase, they had developed an archive in the studio. So all of the artwork was archived and cataloged, and somewhere Warner Brothers has a catalog of all the original artwork. So whatever existed, we were, as we got into the flow of the show, we would finish an episode, and then everything would go from the production managers and producers would go into the archive, and they would catalog everything, and unless you managed to slip stuff into your portfolio, which many people did, that's where it all ended up. But I think most of those title cards are in archives, but I'm sure some of them have slipped away, and I would love to say that I've got some, but I have none of them.
Whose idea was it to do those very
I think Bruce and I were both, it all sort of evolved out of the pulp sort of influence on the show, and as we were developing the show, we needed, Tiny Toons had title cards attached to all those shows, and they were, influenced by the original Looney Tunes. So we thought we would do our version of it, but since we're doing drama and we're doing, we considered all of the films as miniature features, is the way we approached them. So then we looked back to the pulp sort of influence and all the noir influenced films, and thought, let's just do title cards that are going to go into the style of the show.
And it really set the tone, because you'd play the theme, Shirley's theme for each character with it.
Yeah, and it just worked out. It was, again, as so many things that came with the show, and the fact that it's lasted as long as it did, you'd love to think that, we knew this was going to be great, and people were going to love this. It just was what we were doing at the time, and the fact that it stuck and people gravitated towards it, it's kind of cool, but it literally couldn't see it until, at least for myself, until I was removed from it, a few years later, and you'd start hearing folks from the outside commenting on it, and then you'd kind of realize that, it turned out pretty good, but you would love to know that was absolutely from the beginning. We knew it was going to be that way.
It sounds like a lot of juggling for that. So what happens when you get Mask of the Phantasm on top of the show, which is probably the best film in the Batman universe?
That's a great compliment to everybody that worked on it. But it happened to come at the towards the end of the 65, the first order, they had ordered an additional 20 episodes, and Phantasm was going to be done simultaneous, just by coincidence. So Bruce and I just decided he was going to finish up the 20 episodes, I was going to go on to the long form, and that's kind of, we were still bouncing back and forth for both productions, but they just happened together. And originally that Phantasm was just going to be a direct-to-video. You know, there was no intention, and the story's been told before, but I was overseas handing the show out to the Korean studios, and you're going through and talking about storyboards and what the show's supposed to be, and then got a call from LA, and they decided there was a window that they could release it in the theaters, and said it's going to be a theatrical release, and we were like, are you out of your fucking minds? This wasn't designed at all for the big screen, not only in the quality, but even the format. You know, we came up with a last-ditch effort to build a frame that we could work over the top, because the ratio on the screen was set for television, and they suddenly wanted it to go to full widescreen theatrical. So we ended up building a frame that overseas could use on their layouts, so that they could preserve all the animation and storyboard that we had planned, but then they would have to add fielding on either side just to compensate for the screen. But then the line quality was an issue, and they weren't going to spend a lot more money on it. They were going to give enough. Basically, the money equated to they're going to give overseas a couple more months to finish, and that's how we got our additional budget. But all that meant was a little bit more careful attention to line quality, because once it's going to blow up on the big screen, the image is going to fall apart. And you know, to this day, I saw the film for the first time in 20 years, maybe a year ago at a screening in LA, and half the film I couldn't even look at. I was just like, no, it's everybody that likes it, but I only see the imperfections, because there's so many things that, because of the fact that it wasn't intended for the big screen, there's things that are out of focus, and you know, details that are really kind of mushy, that again, they look great on a table-sized piece of artwork, but once you blow it up, it's like, ooh, shit.
You went on to work on the Spawn animated series.
Yes.
What lessons or tricks you took from Batman animated series did you input in that show?
Well, purely by coincidence, Spawn was as dark as it was, but we just happened to get the additional bonus of going R-rated. So it just further supported the idea of maintaining the drama. And now it was, you know, and this, even though it's going to be reported, you know, working with Todd on that, it was, he wanted it to be dark, bloody, violent, and yet the very nature of Batman was to suggest that dark violence and brutality, whereas on Spawn there was an urgency to show that, and I didn't. That was a challenge to manage that, because that wasn't my first take as to the way it should have been done. But Todd was pretty insistent on the way he wanted that portrayed. So, you know, brought as much of the staging and compositions that we could take from the dark shadows of Batman and push it a little bit further, and try and build into the scripts some of that drama that suggested a lot more of the what's in the shadows than showing it. So it was, you know, we had fun with it. It was great, but again, it was no Batman. So,
how does it feel to have contributed so heavily to Batman's history?
It's overwhelming to hear it at this point, because again, in the midst of it, it was a steady gig, and it was, you know, working with great people, and we all had the same goal in mind, to produce a quality show. But not until, again, you're removed from it by a few years and experiences on different shows to realize how unique it was, and how many incredibly talented people were working on the show at the time. And you knew it at the time and respected it, but you just didn't know what it would become. So now to look back at it, it's really just a privilege to have been there at the time and working with the people that we worked with. And you know, you just don't get opportunities like that, because ever since I've worked on a lot of different things, very much with the same work ethic and attempt to try and make the quality, but there's never going to be another Batman, you know. And that, it's not only because it was the first big show we worked on, but it was a unique scenario, and you know, all of the planets were in line to allow us to be able to do what we did. So
What do you think more modern animated series could learn?
I wish that the executives that order the shows, when, you know, this is when they reference doing a show like Batman. If they would let us do a show like Batman, they would have great shows.
Yeah.
But they reference it and then they pull everything out that made Batman successful as it was. And that
So they
means,
like learn the wrong lessons.
well,
from what they
or
learned.
they don't really know what the lessons were. You know, I have my issue with executives in general, that a lot of them sort of get to that position sideways, and then they're dictating to the creators what shows should be. And it's like, but you hired me because we did that, but now you don't want to let me do that. And that's why a lot of the shows suffer from the same problems. It's, you know, second guessing by people that just don't have the skill or the experience to really produce quality shows. So whenever a solid show comes out, I'm applauding all along to think, I don't know how you did it, but good for you, because it's really difficult to get shows made these days.
With reboots so popular right now, what's stopping you guys from going to Sam Register and saying, let's do a 13 episode order?
Yeah, that would be a Sam Register request. You know, I'm no longer associated with Warner's, but I don't know. I certainly would think that that's where they want to go.
Would you be open to it?
Honestly, I thought about that because of all the reboots that were happening when they mentioned Rugrats was coming up.
Yeah.
And for me, it would be just leave it alone. You know, let it be what it was, because it's as solid as it was. And I'm not doubting that it could be replicated, but it's almost like you just don't want to. You don't want to try and redo it again. You don't want to rebuild the pyramids. It's like they're the pyramids and they're the pyramids. Leave them alone. You can build them better and stronger and different, but you know, and that's for me. That's fans might love that, and I'm sure it could be done. It's just it just seems almost desperate to want to recapture something that lived when it lived. So I'd rather just leave it alone, leave it as it was.
What was your favorite Batman episode?
The other table asked me my top 5, so I'm going to go to the one that came up last in my memory, but it truly is the favorite, is On Leather Wings, the very first episode, because it was the first time we saw the entire, year and a half that we had planned and developed and put the show together. To see it come back and be as pure as it was is probably, that's very favorite in my mind.
Thank you very much.